Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Alt Hero. Thanks for tuning in. I had a pair of pretty big announcements today as these things go, and I'm pleased to be able to confirm that we are going to very soon be, I believe we're actually very close to the mark to do, let me see here. I think we're very close to the goal for the website, and so we're working on that. Yeah, we got a couple hundred more, but we should be hitting that possibly by the time that I'm done with this Darkstream. Anyhow, we're going to be launching the site sooner rather than later. We're not going to do it before the end of the campaign, but we're starting to look into how we're going to add a Alt Hero section to the Castalia House site. We've already acquired a couple of URLs that one of which I think is going to prove extremely amusing to everyone. And we've got a lot of ideas. I'm sure that some of you guys are going to have more ideas. If this is something, if you're into RPGs and you have any interest in what we're doing with Alt Hero, I would encourage you to sign up for the Site Hero, because those are the people who are really going to be guiding what we do with the site. I mean, yes, we're going to do the obvious stuff. We're going to have a wiki, all that sort of thing. But like most of the stuff that I do, we're going to be relying pretty heavily on what we're doing. No, we're not talking about a RPG computer game here. We're talking about an actual pen and paper RPG. It's being designed by someone who is very good at systems, RPG systems, and so forth. And in fact, we've already discussed the core basis of the system, the way that because the most important thing in a superhero system is how the powers of the various superheroes interrelate, and so that's what we're discussing tonight. I've also talked to Mr. Chuck Dixon, and he is also going to be working on that, or contributing to that as well. So, you've got two experienced game designers plus two experienced writers, actually three, because John Della Rose, who is writing the first two Alt Hero novels with me, he is actually a pretty serious RPG guy, and he is going to be putting together the first official Alt Hero RPG campaign. So we're not doing any minis yet. That's a possibility. I actually have a relationship with some of the folks at Mantic Games, but we'll take a look at that in time. One thing at a time. One thing I've been trying to stress to everyone is that we are not going to bite off more than we can chew. Getting into miniatures and that sort of stuff, we've looked into it. We actually looked very seriously at doing a Kickstarter 2 years ago that was going to be a miniatures game. But for various reasons, that didn't work out, and so we just didn't do it. On that principle, don't do what you can't do well. And so, contrary to some of the doubters and naysayers, we can do everything that we have talked about doing. We already have the various. We have some new illustrators that some of them are names that you'd recognize, but Yeah, the RPG is vastly more price accessible without miniatures. I mean, miniatures are expensive, just getting them made, getting the molds, all that sort of thing. It's not something that we would even consider at this point. So, the main thing is that we need to, the main thing is that we need to produce, great graphic novels. That's the main focus. Because they're going to come out, months, long before the RPG comes out. The RPG is going to. I'm not worried at all about the RPG because, I know the designer, I know his work, and I've already, like I said, we've already been discussing what we're going to do on the for the basic core mechanic, and he's already come up with what is frankly a pretty elegant system. And so, I mean, the thing is, all that the merchandise and that sort of thing is important. It's certainly something that's helped us hit our goals and so forth. Although we don't have very much of it compared to the average Kickstarter. We're not doing, I don't know, challenge coins and all that kind of stuff, all the little collectible stuff. Frankly, because we didn't want to dilute our effort. Even just getting the Rebel figurine made is a little bit of a distraction from the main focus of the graphic novels and the stories. And so, but if you notice how all the people that we've brought in are experienced and good at what they do, we have a high degree of confidence that we're going to deliver something that is going to exceed expectations. That's the goal. We're not looking at this, we're not trying to do what Marvel and DC do. We're not producing 22-page little, flimsy little things, trying to crank them out once a month and so forth. It's not what we do. We may never do that, for all I know. Yeah, and we could certainly do. I mean, the thing is, thanks to Crypto Fashion, we could, if we wanted to, come out with 10 different shirts. And probably, given the fact that we already have the artwork, we could probably get those out in a matter of 2-3 weeks. But we're not going to do that. We're going to do everything methodically. We're going to do everything in a coherent and calm manner that allows us to build a strong foundation, because what we have learned is that there's more interest in this than we'd suspected. The night before we launched the campaign, I talked to each of the guys involved and warned them, look, we're going to make our best effort. If we hit 25,000, great, we'll do it. And if we don't, that's okay. Then we've learned. We haven't wasted too much time. And so it's a little bit of a shock to see that would happen so quickly. I've never imagined being a comics baron, and I'm not now. We'll see where things are in 5 years. It would be nice if it, provided another strong pillar to support Castelia House, even support Alpenwolf. So, one thing at a time. No, I don't think the SJWs are laughing anymore. They would be laughing even less if they knew who some of the additional people involved are. But, the funny thing is, the funny thing about this is that, I've never been one of those people who is personally motivated by, make their heads explode. That's a sad puppy's Cuckservative type of motivation. You know, it's really not how I think. For all, I mean, which is kind of ironic because, you know, given how upset I tend to make SJWs and everything, you know, it's really nothing more than a useful attribute. You know, I mean, I'm aware of it. I use it, but it's not something that motivates me in the slightest. You know, it's not like I wake up, have a coffee, and then think, how can I trigger SJWs today? It's, you know, I pretty much trigger them simply by my mere existence. And so, you know, how would that be particularly motivating? It's not the objective. And that's something that a lot of the folks, the sort of moderates, well, here's the thing. I understand why the I was just talking about this with somebody tonight. I understand why the SJWs assume that alt hero is going to be like that. It's because they cannot imagine anything else. You know, they cannot imagine that despite the fact that I have complete control over what alt hero is and becomes, they cannot imagine that I would tell Chuck Dixon, you know, here's the parameters of the world, do what you want. You know, I mean, I think so far the extent of my suggestion, the extent of all my suggestions to Mr. Dixon were, of all the city names, the different city names he looked at, I mentioned that Avalon was one of them that I preferred, and that was one of his favorites too, so that's what we went with. And I think my other big suggestion was that if there is a military base, it should probably be a Coast Guard one, because I think the Coast Guard tends to get short shrift, and you know, the other ones wouldn't actually be as useful or interesting for storyline purposes. And so, you know, if you need a military depot somewhere, you know, there's always a you know, the National Guard if you need to work that in. So, you know, SJWs can't fathom that. They can't imagine not trying to control everything. And so they assume that I'm doing that, and because they are intent in preaching their politics to everyone at all times, they naturally assume that that's what we're going to do. And of course, you know, we've encouraged them to think that. You know, there's a reason why the heroes that we first showed were Rebel and Captain Europa. You know, of course we knew that would. Of course we knew what the reaction would be. We were no more surprised by that than Donald Trump was surprised by the NFL doubling down when he called them out. You know, it's just a question of what's going to set them off. You know, I mean, if Rebel didn't exist, Dynamique might have set them off because, you know, I mean, do you think it's an accident that she smokes when Marvel has gone out of their way to not permit it in their movies and comics? You know, but the thing is that it serves two purposes, because on the one hand, it helps the guerrilla marketing, but on the other, it also helps define the character. You know, there's we have a great image of Dynamique that Timothy Lim is working on right now, and we worked in the. Of course, we had to work in the cigarette, and you know, it really works well in terms of this particular. And remember this when you see this. When you see this image of her when we release it in a couple days, remember that we had this conversation, because it really helps define her character, and it really helps define, her narcissism, her indifference, and so forth. Would that work as well with a book? Of course not. Especially not given that she's French and so forth. And as someone who my best female friend was the den mother for a house full of elite models in Paris. Believe me, I know how French models tend to smoke, like chimneys. So, the important thing for the success of Alt Hero is that the stories are good, but more importantly, that the characters are memorable. And, if you look at how much success we've had so far with just 3 or 4 characters, people are already talking about Rebel. They're already talking about Captain Europa, Dynamique, and to a lesser extent, Hammer. Michael Martel, the Hammer. They are already talking about them in a way that they don't talk about most of Marvel or DC's heroes. Because most of them, the iconic ones, are great. The Batmans, the Spider-Mans, and so forth. But most of them are forgettable. Most of them are completely forgettable. And so, I think that people are going to be much more I actually suspect that by the time all the first 9 volumes are out, people are going to have a more attachment to a lot of the alt hero characters than they do to many, if not most, of the Marvel and DC Comics characters. I realize that's a bold statement, but I suspect that's true because the amount of care that is going into some of these characters. I've been really surprised and very pleased by the design of heroes that the backers have helped develop. Ryu no Seishin is fantastic. Soulsight is so awesome that Chuck Dixon claimed him immediately, and said he wanted to use him. And there's a new one who hasn't been introduced yet. Her name is Songbird. She's very different, very, very different, very European, and I think it's going to be a really interesting, an interesting one. Yeah, there's 4 design heroes, and so far 3 of them have been created, and so they're and some, I have to admit, I would not have created any of those 3 on my own. And I really like what they are. I really like aspects of each one of them. And, and so these backers are not only making, they've not only been the biggest help in making Alt Hero possible, they're actively making it better. And I hope that we can continue to do that in the future. I think it's worthwhile because this is a classic example of what Nicholas Taleb describes as skin in the game. When people put skin in the game, they bring their best effort. If we just said, hey, the difference between the ideas that people have when they just throw them out on the blog and when they have devoted pretty sizable financial resources to saying, hey, I really want to do this. is significant. You know, literally, I mean, it's kind of crazy. Literally, none of the suggestions that I saw on the blog were suggestions that I wanted to incorporate for heroes. I've heard from 3 of the 4 Design a Hero backers, and all 3 of them are good to great. All 3 of them are as strong as any of the characters that we've created, with the exception thus far, I would say, of Rebel, just because she's so iconic, and probably Captain Europa, maybe Dynamique. I don't know. We'll see. But you know, it's an interesting task. I'm gonna check something here. You know, it's an interesting task. I don't have an objective for a mix. You know, we're just doing what makes sense. You know, we'd probably have a pretty close to 50-50 match, just because of the nature of the origin stories. But we'll see. You know, I don't really think that way. You know, we're basically thinking in terms of what does the story need. So, you know, like a lot of my novels, things begin because of a mental picture. You know, Dynamique began because I had a mental picture of her sitting there. No, that's not a hurdle at all. I don't think you understand how we work or how we think. I am utterly indifferent to anyone who is concerned about racism. I don't care at all. You can want, I mean, I care no more about people being concerned about racism than I am about their concerns about the infield fly rule, or their opinion of Fabian socialism, you know, the benefits of Fabian socialism versus the socialism of the Comte de Saint-Sauveur. It's if you don't read a book because you're concerned that it's racist, you are not part of my target market. Also, what a lot of Americans don't realize is that the rebel flag all around the world represents defiance. That's why the yeah, but again, I don't care. I'm not. Not only do I not care about that, I think you'll see with the story that that we're quite willing to we're quite willing to confront that attitude directly. So, you know, there's a reason why you can go into you know, a store in Italy or a store in Germany, and one of the flags that you'll find that they sell there is the rebel flag. So, you know, we think it's cool, and we're going to make it even cooler. So, anyhow, pretty much you can guarantee that if it's something that that upsets the SJWs, we'll find a way to get it in there. I'm not going to talk about Catalonia tonight, or about Italy tonight, but I will talk a bit more about the RPG. And you know, I'm not a huge I'm more of a classic RPG guy. I never really played role-playing games much, but I read them. What I mean by that is I actually have a huge box of Traveller books, pretty much all of them ever printed, starting with the little black books. I actually bought the rights to the computer game rights in the middle 90s from Mark Miller, and we signed a big $1 million contract with Sega of America to develop Traveler, the role-playing game. And in fact, I actually got Julian LeFay, who created the Elder Scrolls series. He left Bethesda and came to work for me in order to make that game. Unfortunately, Sega of Japan, this game was for the what was called the Katana at the time, the Sega Katana, which was eventually renamed the Sega Genesis, the Sega Dreamcast. Yeah, we actually had the whole randomized character generation working. We had all this subsector, the map with all the subsectors and everything. It was going to be an amazing game. I mean, it really was. Mark was extremely excited about it. Unfortunately, Sega of Japan decided that they didn't like American games, so they shut down. They didn't want any games developed in America, so they shut down all American game development and took the $100 million that they were planning on spending on our game and 13 other launch titles. These were all launch titles, you know. They took that money and they spent all of it to put Dreamcast on the front of various European football jerseys like Arsenal. In fact, I actually have an Arsenal Dreamcast jersey. And then they decided to come out with weird Japanese games like Panzer Dragoon and Night into Dreams. You know, it was ridiculous. Just absolutely ridiculous. And so the RPG is pen and paper, as I've already said. Anyhow, no, there's no reviving it now. Nothing exists but an old, outdated game design document. I don't think I even have the full design document. But so anyhow, I do have some knowledge of role-playing games myself. We have, you know, I had Gamma World, I had Traveler, I had the Avalon Hill one, the Avalon Hill ripoff of D&D. I want to say Tunnels and Trolls, but I think it was Powers and Perils, if I recall correctly. It was pretty obscure and it wasn't that interesting, but I never really played them. I mostly just read them, and so you know that's why I'm not the right guy to design the RPG, and also because I haven't really kept up on development. We are. That's pretty funny. That would actually make for a funny joke RPG. But no, we are designing our own system, and it's going to be a good, solid system. We already have it's going to show some influence from Heroes. It's going to show some influence from Traveler. You know, so we'll see. You know, if the Alt Hero RPG is successful, then we do have plans to expand it to to do more role playing games. We'd probably do a Selenoth set, you know, a fantasy set set in Selenoth, and then we'd probably also do another one that is set in I'd like to do a urban fantasy one that's set in the Moth and Cobweb universe. You know, John C. Wright is a big role-playing gamer. So what I can tell you is that John Delarose is writing the first campaign book for the Alt Hero RPG, and that is going to be included with anyone who backs the campaign and gets the hardcover rulebook is also going to receive a copy of John's campaign in paperback. So, and he is here himself. So, I would tell you, go ahead and ask any questions, except for John knows even less about where things are at the moment than I do. So, but the thing is that we've got a lot of good talent around this. We've got unexpectedly strong support from the backers, for which we're very grateful. When we need playtesters, we will certainly put out a call for them. Yeah, John has plenty of RPG experience, and so this will and we're going to be given a tremendous amount of source material from what I've been developing for Alt Hero and what Chuck Dixon's been developing for Avalon, and so I think that a setting encyclopedia. I don't think so, but anyhow, well, that's all I've got for tonight. So there's a week left in the campaign. If you haven't backed it yet, I would strongly encourage you to do so, and I'll look forward to talking to you probably tomorrow night. Have a good evening.